Those little monsters should have been drowned at birth. They strike me as compelling arguments for birth control. As my father pointed out years ago, I am an amoral wretch who does not necessarily regard an unfinished human being, wet and soiled and smelly at one end and yelling at the other, as adorable. In my opinion, many babies are simply bad-tempered, mean little devils who grow up to be bad-tempered, mean big devils. Look around you. The sweet innocence of children is a myth. Dean Swift had an appropriate solution for some of them in a modest proposal, but he should not have limited it to the Irish, as there are many scoundrels who are not Irish. Now, you may be so prejudiced and opinionated that you feel that my children are less than perfect, despite the overwhelming evidence that mine were born with halos and cherub's wings. So I won't bore you with every time Nancy brought home straight A's on her report cards. Practically every time, that is. My kids are smarter than your kids. Prettier, too. Is that enough? All right. I'll drop the matter. My kids are wonderful to me, and your kids are wonderful to you, and let's leave it at that, and not bore each other. I mentioned the panic of 1907 when I told you about Betty Lou's marriage to Nelson, but at the time I had no idea that a panic was coming. Nor did Brian, or Nelson, or Betty Lou. But history does repeat itself, somewhat and in some ways, and something that happened in early 1907 reminded me of something that happened in 1893. After the birth of Georgie, on Betty Lou's wedding day, I stayed home as usual for a while. But as soon as I felt up to moving around, I left my brood with Betty Lou and went downtown. I planned to go by streetcar, was unsurprised when Nelson volunteered to drive me down in his Rio runabout. I accepted and bundled up warm. The Rio was rather too well ventilated. It had an open buggy somewhere in its ancestry. My purpose was to move my savings account. I had placed it in the Missouri Savings Bank in 1899, when we married and settled in Kansas City, by a draft on the First State Bank of Butler. The booming metropolis of Thebes had no banks, where Father had helped me to open a savings account when we came back from Chicago. By the time I was married, it had grown to more than $100. Footnote. If I had more than $100 in a savings account, why did I serve my family fried mush for their evening meal? Answer. Do you think I'm crazy? In 1906, in the American Middle West, a sure way for a wife to castrate spiritually her husband would be to suggest that he was incapable of keeping food on the table. I didn't need Dr. Fraud to tell me that. Males live by pride. Kill their pride, and they won't support wives and children. It would be some years before Brian and I would learn how to be utterly open and easy with each other. Brian knew that I had a savings account, but he never asked me how much I had in it, and I would serve fried mush or do any symbolic equivalent as often as needed before I would buy groceries with my own money. Savings were for a rainy day. We both knew this. If Brian fell ill, had to go to a hospital, I would use my savings as needed. We had no need to talk about it. Meanwhile, Brian was the breadwinner. I did not intrude into his responsibility, nor he into mine. But what about foundation monies? Didn't that hurt his pride? Perhaps it did. It may be indicative to take a look into the future. In the long run, every dime we received from ringing the cash register wound up with our children, as each got married. Brian never mentioned to me any such intention. In 1907, it would have been silly to do so. By early 1907, my savings account had grown to over $300, by nickels and pennies and tightest economies. Now that I was working at home and could no longer go to school downtown, it seemed smart to me to move my account to a little neighborhood bank near the South Side Post Office substation. One of us four had to go to our post office box each day. Whoever did it could make deposits for me. If ever I had to withdraw money, then that one could be I. Nelson parked his runabout on Grand Avenue, and we walked around to 920 Walnut. I took my passbook to a teller, did not have to wait, the bank was not crowded, and told the teller that I wanted to withdraw my account. I was referred to an officer of the bank, over behind the railing, a Mr. Smatterin. Nelson put down the newspaper he had been glancing at, stood up. Difficulty? I don't know. They don't seem to want to let me have my money. Will you come with me? Sure thing. Mr. Smatterin greeted me politely, but raised his brows at Nelson. I introduced them. This is Mr. Nelson Johnson, Mr. Smatterin. He's my husband's business partner. How do you do, Mr. Johnson? Please sit down. Mrs. Smith, our Mr. Wimple tells me that you need to see me about something. I suppose I do. I attempted to withdraw my account. He told me that I must see you. Mr. Smatterin gave a smile that displayed his false teeth. We are always sorry to lose an old friend, Mrs. Smith. Has our service been unsatisfactory? Not at all, sir, but I wish to move my account to a bank closer to my home. It is not too convenient to come all this way downtown, especially in this cold weather. He picked up my passbook, glanced at the address in the front, then at the current amount farther on. May I ask where you propose to transfer your account, Mrs. Smith? I was about to tell him when I caught Nelson's eye. He didn't actually shake his head, but I've known him a long time. Why do you ask that, sir? It is part of a banker's professional duty to protect his customers. If you wish to move your account, fine, but I want to see you go to an equally reliable bank. My wild animal instincts were aroused. Mr. Smatterin, I have discussed this in detail with my husband. I had not. And I do not need to seek advice elsewhere. He made a tent of his fingers. Very well. As you know, the bank can require 3 weeks' notice on savings accounts. But, Mr. Smatterin, you yourself were the officer I dealt with when I opened my account here. You told me that the fine print was just a formality, required by the State Banking Act, but that you personally assured me that any time I wanted my money, I could have it. And so you can. Let's change that 3 weeks to 3 days. Just go home and write us a written notice of intent, and 3 business days later you can close your account. Nelson stood up, put his hands flat on Mr. Smatterin's desk. Now just one moment, he drawled loudly. Did you or did you not tell Mrs. Smith that she could have her money any time she wanted it? Sit down, Mr. Johnson, and lower your voice. After all, you are not a customer here. You don't belong here. Nelson did not sit down, did not lower his voice. Just answer yes or no. I could have you evicted. Try it. Just try it. My partner, Mr. Brian Smith, this lady's husband, asked me to come with Mrs. Smith. Brian had not, because he had heard that your bank was just a little bit reluctant. That's slander. That's criminal slander. To be as polite to ladies as you are to businessmen. Now, do you keep your promise to her, right now, or 3 days from now? Mr. Smatterin was not smiling. Wimple, let's have a check for Mrs. Smith's account. We all kept quiet while it was made out. Mr. Smatterin signed it, handed it to me. Please see that it is correct. Check it against your passbook. I agreed that it was correct. Very well. Just take that to your new bank and deposit it. You will have your money as soon as it clears. Say about 10 days. He smiled again, but there was no mirth in it. You said I could have my money now. You have it. There's our check. I looked at it, turned it over, endorsed it, handed it to him. I'll take it now. He stopped smiling. Wimple. They started counting out banknotes. No, I said, I want cash, not paper issued by some other bank. You are hard to please, madam. This is legal tender. But I deposited real money every time, not banknotes. And I had nickels and dimes and quarters, and sometimes pennies. once in a while a silver cartwheel. I want to be paid back in real money. Can't you pay me in real money? Of course we can, Mr. Smattern answered stiffly. But you will find over 25 pounds of silver dollars quite cumbersome. That's why bank certificates are used for most transactions. Can't you pay me in gold? Doesn't a great big bank like this one carry any gold in its vaults? 15 double eagles would be ever so much easier to carry than would be 300 cartwheels. I raised my voice a little and projected it. Can't you pay me in gold? If not, where can I take this to change it for gold? They paid in gold, with the odd change in silver. Once we were headed south, Nelson said, Phew! What bank out south do you want? Troost Avenue Bank or Southeast State? Nellie, I want to take it home and ask Brian to take care of it. Huh? I mean, yes, ma'am, right away. Dear, something about this reminds me of 1893. What do you remember about that year? 1893, let me see. I was 9, and just beginning to notice that girls are different. You and Uncle Ira went to the Chicago Fair. When you got back, I noticed that you smelled good. But it took another 5 years to get you to notice me, and I had to slide a pie under you to manage it. You always were a bad boy. Never mind my folly in 98. What happened in 93? Mr. Cleveland started his second term, then banks started to fail, and everybody blamed it on him. Seems a bit unfair to me. It was too soon after he was sworn in. The Panic of 93, they called it. So they did, and my father did not lose anything in it for reasons he described as pure dumb luck. Nor did my mother, because she always did her banking in a teapot on the top shelf. Father accidentally did something like that. He left Mother a 4 months' allowance in cash in 4 sealed envelopes, each with a date. He took with him cash in gold in a money belt, and he left money behind, whatever it was beyond what we needed, in a lockbox, again in gold. Nelson, he told me later that he had not guessed that banks were about to fail. He did it just to annoy Deacon Houlihan. Deacon Hooligan, Father called him. Do you remember him? President of Butler State Bank. No, I guess he died without my permission. Father told me that the deacon had remonstrated with him for drawing out cash. The deacon said it was poor business practice. Just leave instructions to pay Mrs. Smith, Mother, I mean, so much each month. Father should leave his money where it was and use checks, the modern way to do business. Father got bulky. He's good at that, and consequently, the bank failures never touched him. Nelson, I don't think Father did business with any bank after that. He just kept cash in a lockbox in his surgery, I think. Although with Father, one is never sure. We had a conference about it when we got home. Brian, me, Nelson, Betty Lou. Nelson told them what had happened. Getting money out of that bank was like pulling teeth. This boiled shirt certainly did not want to part with Mo's money. I don't think he would have done so if I had not made a loud, obnoxious nuisance out of myself, but that is only part of the point. Mo, tell him about Uncle Ira in a similar case. I did so. Dears, I don't claim to know anything about finance. I'm so stupid that I never have understood how a bank can print paper money and claim that it is just the same as real money. But today felt like 1893 to me, because it is just the sort of thing that happened to Father just before the bank started to fail. He didn't get caught by bank failures because he was bulky and stopped using banks. I don't know. I just don't know, but I felt uneasy and decided not to put my egg money back into a bank. Brian, will you keep it for me? Here in the house, it could be stolen. Nelson said, and if it's in a bank, the bank can fail. Are you getting jumpy now? Maybe. Betty Lou, what do you think? I think I'm going to draw out my 35 cents and find a mason jar and bury it in the backyard. She paused.